What you got for me? Although the question was simple enough, the answer would take some time to explain. A double-barrel-chested young black man stood at the foreground, shadowed by a brick building ripe with the denizens of the Section 8 world behind him. His muscles looked as solid as the structure he was standing in front of. He greeted us with a time-honored slogan in the street vernacular. As he stood before my friend and I, it was apparent that his demeanor and tone of voice were contradictory. His scarred, scarecrow face wore a congenial smile, but it sounded like he meant business. On a crisp Cincinnati night in the spring of April of 2001, my friend and I crossed paths with history while walking through East Walnut Hills, in the town where I lived more years than all the other places I've called home. Good old Ohio and the nasty natty, home of many complex sagas, both wildly personal and a few historical, cultural events. This story will traverse both and includes a bit of sound advice from Captain Obvious. If someone you don't know says something similar, like "what do you have for me?" when you're walking in an urban area, especially if you're not from there, regardless of the year or state, there's a good chance it's an inquiry into what you're willing to part with, by your consent or otherwise. We were making our way on foot to a bus stop near the intersection of Victory Parkway and William Howard Taft Road. The brevity of the question was highlighted by the presence of a dozen or more of his vigilante pals, who were about a city block away from us, standing in front of the entrance to a massive high-rise apartment building that sat on a small incline overlooking the busy intersection. I had passed by this corner countless times without incident, at various hours of the day and night, since moving to the neighborhood less than a year before. The clean slate I enjoyed in this area until now was about to be tarnished with a stain or two. There was always an edge of urban blight within walking distance of my apartment, but I probably mistook the previous lack of belligerence for blank check acceptance by the community at large due to some of my pro-urban ways. My resume of supposed suburbified street cred included, but was not limited to, such things as a strong dislike of crooked and racist cops, conversely, a strong liking for selling and using illegal substances, being thrown up against walls and cop cars more than once after being stopped and searched, and a love of smoking weed and of hip-hop. My lack of an urbane attitude and a penchant for foul speech also aligned me with the plight of the urban downtrodden tribe, or at least so I thought. Having the kaleidoscope of adversity in New York City as part of my background made me different from the average bear in that town, the town we called the 513. But alas, my profile still looked like a stereotype, and I was regarded as such by the streets on this night in question. Although I'm the grandson of Italian immigrants and my real surname by blood is Spanish, at the end of the day, to the inner city folks, I was just another overprivileged white boy from the burbs gone wild in the city. On the surface, it's not difficult to understand in retrospect the inherent stereotype of my appearance, but from my own point of view at the time, I was working hard, paying my way, living in a shared apartment, and doing my best to carpe diem life to the fullest. I froze my ass off, suffering the indignity of getting drenched in kamikaze downpours of rain while waiting for the bus. Life without a car was not a high priority for the social engineers who implemented the car-centric infrastructure of Cincinnati. I had to walk more than the typical suburbanite refugees who made their way inside the city limits. That was one of a slew of merit badges that I never hesitated to tout when questioned by polite society about who I was and what I did. Seldom did I doubt my presence in the urban environment or consider the deeper implications of how I might be judged at a glance by those less privileged based on appearance, until that night. My companion for this misadventure was one of my closest friends from the dazed and confused era of high school in the 90s. Today, we'll call him Randall for the sake of the story. Randall and I graduated from the class of 97 and came of age in the same corn-fed environment, but his sensibilities were not quite as brash as mine. My family's roots, in tandem with the early trips to New York City, exposed me to another galaxy of creation that had nothing to do with the small-town city vibe of the 513. The divergence in our backgrounds and temperament manifested that night in a distinct difference of opinions. I had to convince him that we could set out on foot from my apartment in East Walnut Hills on Francis Lane, with the notion that we could catch a crosstown bus without being hassled. The goal was to visit the girl I was dating at the time, a real head-turner whose alias for the book will be Nicole. on Flora Street in Clifton Heights area, not too far from Randall's Place and near the campus of University of Cincinnati. What complicated the situation is that within the last 24 hours, rioting and unrest had emerged in different parts of the city in response to Officer Stephen Roach of the Cincinnati Police and his slaying of an unarmed African American, a 19-year-old man named Timothy Thomas. The suspect was pursued on foot by Officer Roach in response to 14 outstanding misdemeanor traffic violations. Roach claimed that he thought Thomas was reaching for a weapon, when in fact, after the officer shot the young suspect in the back, he was found to be unarmed. Including the murder of Thomas in 2001, more than a dozen members of the Black community had died at the hands of Cincinnati law enforcement in less than 10 years. People who hailed from different parts of the city, but could be united under two concepts, being Black and being discriminated against, were understandably fed up and had taken to the streets to violently voice their displaced outrage at the expense of private property and innocent people alike. Unfortunately, some of the younger, less mature rioters adopted an eye for an eye policy, looking for anyone who could be victimized. Randall and I were making the most of having the day off from the restaurant where we worked. Hanging out on his side of town in Clifton Heights that day was as normal as any other time with friends from that era. Without giving it much thought, we had taken a crosstown bus back to my pad, which was around the corner from one of Cincinnati's most stellar urban gems, Eden Park. Cincinnati had its occasional uniqueness, and Eden Park was a cultural intersection that included a small melting pot of artists, local Black people, uppity snobs of all races, well-versed in craft beer, upper-crust families on weekend outings, and degenerate drug users from a wide variety of backgrounds, as well as college students who were hip enough to not be fazed by being in close proximity to people from the other side of the tracks. I fit in somewhere along the lines of that description, and my many good times at the park belied a very unfamiliar, sudden apprehension that crept into the tail end of our run-of-the-mill bus ride. There was a touch of foreshadowing, as before the bus came to a halt at my normal stop, we had to make a hasty departure from the people mover. We could hear disgruntled urban dwellers shouting off in the distance, with interludes of breaking glass and throwing miscellaneous debris against cars and buildings. It wasn't difficult to connect the dots. Misguided or justified, people in the city were looking to bring the lopsided scales of justice back into balance. To the passengers and driver on the bus, it was obvious that there was a commotion that teetered on becoming a predicament in the streets a few blocks behind us. The bus driver had more sense than I did and wanted to run express. Thus, we had nothing more than a few extra minutes to walk from a different bus stop where he let us out just before getting to the safety of my apartment. In retrospect, I should have followed his lead and just avoided the neighborhood in general that day. We sat comfortably in my room on the hip, cabin-like second floor of the apartment I inhabited with another close comrade on Francis Lane in East Walnut Hills. Our creature comforts and high vibe suggested nothing was amiss. Being shielded from the fray unfolding only a few blocks away was reinforced by the style of the bedroom upstairs, which were designed in the likeness of rooms on a ship. The architect who designed the house had apparently hit the seven seas with a vengeance in his prime. The remainder of that afternoon was spent smoking globs of good weed from a recently scored bag of high grade that made your eyes go bloodshot just looking at it. As the sun was doing the limbo, making way for another Cincinnati night, I began to pace in my room in a state of agitated restlessness. I was stuck on fidget mode, preoccupied with thoughts of Nicole. She reminded me of the kind of woman Johnny Depp's character in the movie Blow raved about. Beautiful, passionate, and just as crazy as the man chasing her. The sort who could party like a man and still love like a woman. Nicole had a look that was as sleek as microfiche, a face that spawned 1,000 crushes, and a rack that would make Boy George reconsider his lifestyle. I wouldn't be caught dead letting civil unrest and abuse of authority by the police put a damper on my game. Randall did what he could to play the voice of reason, suggesting we stick it out at my house until the next day, but I wasn't trying to hear it. Trying to win an argument with my sex drive was like trying to find a wooden frying pan to cook pork for vegan Jews. It just wasn't happening. By the time it was dark outside, my nearly 22-year-old libido was fully amped and I was ready to rock. Throw in a few shots of naivety, and there was no talking me out of it. We laced up and prepared to face the action outside. I had the odoriferous sack of ganja tucked neatly into a pack of cigarettes, secured in my pants pocket, and just for good measure, a 40-ounce bottle of something cheap wrapped in a brown paper bag. Randall committed to being burdened by a 6-pack of Killian's Red bottles, and nothing more. Ready for whatever came next, we bounced down the stairs and out the door. The moment of truth was at hand. We trotted by on Victory Parkway at a brisk pace that suggested more confidence than desperation, straddling the sidewalk on the other side of the street from the large, ominous building where the aforementioned swarm of angry young men congregated. Suddenly, our walk to the bus stop was interrupted by a hail of bottles mixed with insults hurled in our general direction. The hang time of the bottles was brief, but the message conveyed was impactful. We weren't welcome in these parts. They didn't invest too much time lobbing projectiles at us, no longer than it would take me to write, "There's no such thing as reverse discrimination." But it took a moment for one of the group to decide on initiating a more cavalier course of action. I had not considered the reality that things like this actually happen to people, regardless of their claims of innocence or being adjacent to members of a persecuted culture who were out to whack social justice warrior-style vigilantism. This muscle-bound concierge of the concrete jungle sprinted across Victory Parkway, arriving in front of us faster than you could say, "Suburban white boys in the wrong hood." I was carrying the pear-shaped 40-ounce bottle of beer in a brown paper bag. Randall had his 6-pack in bottles, with no bag to conceal his bounty, boldly carrying the pack by the carton's handle. "What you got for me?" was the kickoff. We stood there in silence for a moment, contemplating his riddle and hesitant on how to carry the ball upfield. I chose not to reply. Randall, not as accustomed to the spontaneous brutality of violence as I was, due to a couple of my close friendships and associations with notorious violent people, did the least beneficial thing imaginable. Before I could intervene with an explanation of why you should never paint yourself as a victim in a tense situation, he meekly handed our accoster his 6-pack of the good life at a great price, with as much dignity as he could muster. "We don't want any problems, man," was his paltry attempt to make peace. What he did not seem to comprehend is that we were now painted with a target on our backs that might as well have said, "Crackers, free." It was all I could do to not shake my head in disbelief. I remained quiet as now my new friend, Mr. What You Got For Me, was sizing me up. I was about 2 months from my 22nd birthday and stood at barely 125 pounds. I definitely did not rank on the street brawler circuit, but I had been exposed to enough drunken fistfighting from the self-esteem baller scene to understand the error at hand. I persisted in silent refusal to comply as the short, disgruntled urban dweller turned his belligerent gaze toward me in the middle of the street. Taking stock of the group of his cronies watching us in the background, I contemplated my options. Analysis paralysis is usually the wrong choice, but in this case, it saved me from getting mauled by a group of spiteful onlookers. Regardless of my assessment of the situation, our attacker needed no further deliberation. He decided to initiate the melee with a sudden right hook that landed soundly on my left cheek, pushing me off my feet and onto the uncompromising aggregate of asphalt and concrete beneath me. The bottle of beer somehow managed to stay tucked inside the cozy confines of the brown paper bag and landed uneventfully next to me on the ground after bouncing off my lithe frame, which buffered the bottle from breaking. Undeterred, I bounced back up to an upright position, only to encounter a rinse-wash-repeat scenario. The second blow landed me back on my ass again. My unknown assailant, sensing that I knew there was no way to engage him without getting surrounded by his crew nearby, scooped up the large bottle of beer at my side to wash down the accompanying 6-pack. Standing still, upright now in a moment of uncertainty, I watched him walk at a nonchalant pace across the street, touting the spoils of victory in hand. What I didn't realize until that moment was that Randall had run off in a moment of terror-stricken panic. He had taken shelter in the United Dairy Farmers convenience store, which was situated at the northwest corner of the fateful intersection where we were attacked at Victory Parkway and William Howard Taft. There was no time for taking offense at his bitch move. Let's face it, we've all dropped the ball somewhere in our lives during a moment of fear. It was clearly my fault that we were exposed to the brutality of a mob that night, and he did not owe me risking his life to appease my social agenda. I absconded from the intersection of Racial Profiling Drive and Reality Check Way, walking with a scraped knee and swollen cheek at a pace that was nowhere near nonchalant, arriving at the entrance of the store and gratefully entering without incident. Meandering by the cooler in the back for a moment, I found Randall doing what he could to play it calm and low-key, browsing the aisles of snacks and useful household items in a subtle fit of indecision. Yet again, the color of our skin did not go unnoticed. The The two black employees behind the counter turned their attention from scooping ice cream and proceeded to take turns letting us know, in no uncertain terms, that they could not be involved with giving refuge to white people on a night like this. They asked us to leave, and in retrospect, I missed the opportunity to put bills and budgets behind me to the tune of a massive lawsuit. As we stepped out the front door, there was a guy sitting in his car. So a small, beat-up car. He was white. He seemed like he was more or less benign. The car was parked adjacent to the entrance of the store. His face was flushed, and we weren't sure what to think. "You guys look like you need a ride," he asked in a placid voice. We made guttural sounds to confirm his suspicion as I pointed off in the distance, vaguely indicating where my apartment was on Francis Lane, just a few blocks from the store. I managed to explain, in spite of the adrenalized dyslexia of my inner dialogue, "I live that way," and we jumped in. Speeding off into the uncertainty of night, we continued moving on Victory Parkway, rapidly putting the convenience store behind us and out of sight. It did not take very long to get to the intersection of Martin Luther King Drive, where we turned left onto the perpetually busy main road. I thought maybe he preferred taking a different route to get back to my neighborhood, not wanting to cross paths with the gang of hooligans we had just escaped from. The timing of our Good Samaritan seemed heaven-sent, but something was not quite right. Several seconds had passed before I let it be known that we were traveling in the wrong direction. In fact, we were moving, and rather quickly at that, in the opposite direction of where we wanted to be dropped off. "I live that way," I said, half a decibel louder than the first time, pointing with as friendly of a gesture as I could muster while we continued going further and further away from my part of town. Our anonymous chauffeur did not say a word. Approaching a traffic light at the intersection of Gilbert Avenue, we were told that we needed to get the fuck out. In no position to negotiate, we exited the car, reeling with a new level of disbelief just in front of a gas station on the corner. The first thing we took stock of is that there were two black women at a fuel pump, one sitting in the driver's seat of an SUV, and the other standing outside the car, filling the tank as they were engrossed in their own conversation. A typewriter on amphetamines could not dictate at the speed at which we bombarded the two women with our plight. A verifiable mess of a cluttered explanation conveyed that we had just been attacked and needed a ride. Somehow our frenetic chattering earned their empathy. They told us to get in, but there was more to it. I was asked to hide in a crouched position behind the passenger seat, and Randall was asked to do the same behind the driver's seat. As he took the pseudo-fetal position behind the driver, his Sagittarian bravado could no longer avail him, and he broke down, sobbing with relief. Despite my aggravation, I could empathize with both parties here. My determination to make the night a home run had needlessly put my friend in harm's way, and these two street-smart women knew they could not be seen sheltering suburban-looking white dudes without blowback from the unhinged local community that night. I had to abide by the extremity of the situation, so I clenched my teeth, choked back sharp words, and kept my mouth shut. They drove us all the way to the University of Cincinnati's campus, where it was considerably less dangerous that evening. Depositing us near the top of Clifton Avenue, we were now only about a 15-minute walk from my lovely Nicole's house at the bottom of Flora Street in Clifton Heights. Cell phones were not yet the norm, so she had no way of knowing what had happened until we arrived, with my cheek bruised and slightly swollen, and my pride even more bent out of shape. It took several bong rips in her living room to get a grip on the circumstance. She did what she could to coax me into a state of surrender, but not even her naughty librarian-esque charms could help me disassociate from the deeper implications of what went down that night. Any illusions I had about street credibility were currently nowhere to be found, just like the eighth of dank weed I had hidden in a pack of smokes that apparently fell out of my pocket during the tussle. Moonlighting as a purveyor of illicit substances, a staunch palate for hip-hop music, and empathy for being discriminated against as a long-haired teen would get harassed by the police, it did not matter in the slightest. I looked a certain way, and of course did not grow up in the culture where I chose to reside in those days as a struggling young man. On the surface, I was just another whitey with a sugar-coated background compared to urban society's less fortunate. Surely those weaned on rampant violence, harassment from police, court dates, prison sentences, Section 8 vouchers, and EBT cards would not feel the plight of someone who flunked out of college twice on someone else's dime. Not only had I been incorrectly profiled as a bigot based on appearance and nothing more, I had to question whether this was going to be my station in life. Was I, at least in some passive way, part of the problem? After some processing, I did, in fact, have to own some of the tendencies of stereotyping people, despite my surface level claims of being down with the struggle of the disenfranchised. Getting knocked around like a boxing dummy actually did wonders for my leveling up of maturity. I would be much less quick to assume, whether in a positive or negative light, that I had insight into who somebody was and how they perceived me without any direct interaction to validate the perception. What irked me even more at the time was that I was someone who would directly confront and engage people who extolled the virtues of racism or discriminated against others based on color and ethnicity. Furthering my frustration was the fact that the next interlude of the experience found us being thrown out of a well-known convenience store at the behest of employees who were undoubtedly from the area, based on the idea that white equals bad from the mob mentality unleashed that evening. From there, an incontrovertibly white man had actually put us further in harm's way, forcing us to exit his vehicle in a neighborhood that was at least as dangerous, if not worse, than the area where we were just attacked. Finally, a pair of benevolent souls of African heritage had saved our white asses without any benefits or compensation from us for the kindly deed. Those women who gave us a ride did not owe us one thing. They went against the grain and actually put themselves at risk to a certain degree by showing compassion in our moment of distress. That understanding helped me even out of the resentment that I was struggling with that could have been sown from that night, which could have led to a career in hate mongering. The experience imparted lasting insights. It was a solid example that had tangible evidence debunking the idea of reverse discrimination. Secondly, the archetypes of prejudice, ignorance, benevolence, and predation permeate all groups and can be found in any relative truth: white, black, liberal, conservative, urban, suburban, etc. We're all subject to the pendulum tug of war we vacillate between in the struggle of good versus evil that can be found in anyone's story. The labels are easy to throw around as if they had the capacity to consistently represent something that has autonomy. Words of convenience like black, white, suburban, urban require nuance to make that an actual specific person. And finally, the last insight is, just like the memory, a vivid series of colors and layers that imbue a greater understanding of struggle, both timeless and relative to our place in history. What kind of, you can insert everyday label there, are we talking about? Using universal truths to navigate the challenges of understanding identity in the modern world yields tremendous benefits, like not getting weighted down by social engineers who personally want us to quest to be against each other as much as they can. What does it mean in a fact-based world to be white or black? Who validates that answer? My memories are in technicolor, and I've learned that my understanding of people and what goes on between us should be the same, not in black and white.